In the second part of this lecture, we're going to explore parasites from an ecological perspective. Just like all other organisms, we're going to use the concept of niches to understand how parasites have evolved to do the things that they do. Parasites have the opportunity to take advantage of niches that are available, often because they have bizarre and kind of interesting life histories. And these life histories need very specific circumstances and ecological environments to be able to occur. Let's take a look at malaria. As an example, malaria is a plasmodium. Its life cycle requires two separate hosts, a mosquito and a vertebrate, a mammal or a bird. The sexual phase occurs in the mosquito host, and the asexual phase occurs in the vertebrate host. Here's another interesting example in guinea worms. Guinea worms are parasites that occur in Africa. They can be found in water, and a host can become infected when they drink infected water that contains the parasite. The parasite then begins mating in the intestinal walls. Once mated, the females need to lay eggs, and to do so, they need to get to water. Of course, they themselves can't get to water because they live inside the host. So what they do is make their way to the feet, where they bore a small hole in the skin. This lesion then begins to fester and burn, which leads the host to plunge their foot in water. And when they do, that's when the female lays her eggs in the water. Hopefully, these two examples highlight how ecology may play a role. First, for malaria to survive and reproduce, it is limited to areas where there are both types of hosts. That means that it has to be in the right temperature where both hosts overlap, and also where both hosts can reproduce. So there also has to be standing water because mosquitoes need water for their larval life cycle. Now you can see how changing ecological landscapes could potentially play a role in where these organisms are located and how that location could shift. But hopefully you can also see how different hosts could be new niches, how parasites could evolve to take advantage of new hosts, or niches, to evolve new life histories. And to explore this sort of question, you could look at very close related parasites and see how their life histories differ, and then see how that's a consequence of the ecological environment that they're in. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the third part of this lecture. But apart from being limited by hosts and their behavior, I hope you also saw how a parasite can manipulate the host to get what it wants. This can be a very simple manipulation due to a burning sensation that makes you want to put your foot in water, kind of like in the guinea worms we saw, to full-on control like in the jewel wasp. The jewel wasp stings the cockroach twice in very specific areas. The first immobilizes the cockroach, which then allows it to perform the second sting in a very particular spot in the brain. That allows the wasp to stop the escape response and take over the cockroach's motor functions. It then leads the cockroach by its antennae to a hole that it's dug and lays a couple of eggs between the cockroach's legs that will hatch and eat the cockroach. These two examples are manipulation at an individual level. But what happens when these manipulations can occur at a larger scale? Now, for that, let's take a look at Wolbachia. Wolbachia is an interesting parasite. It's a bacteria that has a feminizing effect. And what that means is that if a male is infected with Wolbachia, it becomes a female. Well, who cares, you might say. But the interesting thing is that most animals have a 50-50 sex ratio. And what happens if a larger proportion of individuals become infected with Wolbachia? Well, that's right. The sex ratio begins to change. That means that there are more females in a population than males. That changes the strength and direction of sexual selection. And that has the potential to alter which behaviors are associated with fitness and the traits that evolve. This relationship of Wolbachia to the plethora of hosts it actually parasitizes is interesting to study because in some cases, the parasitism has actually evolved into a mutualism where females can no longer exist without the presence of Wolbachia. So hopefully these examples have shown you the various ways that parasites and hosts interact and how the ecological environment can kind of shape the evolution of different organisms and where different organisms can change the ecological landscape and therefore the interactions between other organisms.